Hello, third grade, and welcome to Chapter 3, Lesson 2, How Do People Express Their Culture? In this lesson, you're going to use your skills to find out how people and groups in the community express their cultures. Reading and talking about how communities share their diverse cultures will help you understand how people shape communities over time. In this picture that we're seeing, we can see in the caption, it says, people show their cultures through dance, music, and through plays, or through acting. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the information in our sidebars here. It says read. Look at the title and other images. What do you think this text will be about? Circle words you don't know. Underline clues that tell you what folk tales and folk songs are and why they matter. Reread the text and the captions. What part of the story of Johnny Appleseed are based on the life of Chapman? What parts are made up? Why do you think people make folktales out of true stories? The story of Johnny Appleseed. Have you ever heard a song or a story about Johnny Appleseed? Appleseed is an American folk hero. His good deeds are the subject of folktales. A deed is something that you do. A folktale is a story handed down over the years. According to folktales, Appleseed was a friendly man who walked across parts of the United States planting apple trees. He had very few belongings and walked barefoot. He wore a pan for a hat, a coffee sack for a shirt, and ragged pants. As he traveled, he scattered apple seeds across the land. The story of Johnny Appleseed is based on the life of John Chapman. Chapman lived in the United States more than 100 years ago. Born in Massachusetts, Chapman worked in an apple orchard at an early age. An orchard is a tree farm. As a teenager, Chapman traveled west. On the way, he brought land and planted apple trees. Like Appleseed, he gave away many seeds and young trees to pioneers. Pioneers were early Americans who settled in the wilderness areas. Unlike Appleseed, Chapman owned land and sold his seeds and trees to make money. Chapman helped many farmers in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana get started. Both Chapman and Appleseed were known for their kindness to people and animals. Today, communities from Massachusetts to California hold festivals to celebrate Johnny Appleseed. The real John Chapman sold many seeds and trees to pioneers. Explore, compare and contrast. To compare is to tell how things are alike, and to contrast is to tell how things are different. To compare and contrast two or more people, places, or things, read the text all the way through. Look for words that signal comparison or contrast. Words such as like, alike, same, and both show comparison. They show how things are similar to each other. Words such as unlike or different show contrast or how things are different from each other. Identify two or more people, places, or things that are being compared. Ask, how are these things alike and how are they different? So based on the text that we read, we're going to complete the Venn diagram below. On the left side, we're going to put things that are specific just to Johnny Appleseed. Things that were true about John Chapman will go on the right, and things that were the same for both will go in the middle. Now, as we were reading, we read that both of them traveled a long way, and both of them were known to be kind to everyone that they met. And they both gave away trees and seeds to pioneers. So that's true for both. Now, the things that are different about Johnny Appleseed and the folktale of Johnny Appleseed was that they described how he was dressed, so that he walked barefoot, he wore a coffee sack and ragged or torn up pants. And we also read that he scattered seeds across the land and he wore a cooking pot for a hat. The things that we knew that were true about John Chapman was that he had worked in an apple orchard and he owned land, and he sold a lot of seeds and young trees to different pioneers that came through. And he helped them to get started in with their farms. Next, we're going to read pages 102 to 107 in our research companion. That's our textbook. And we're going to use our skills to look for evidence that tells how two groups express their culture. So we're going to look at Native American culture and African American culture. And then we're going to use the Venn diagram at the bottom to list the things that are unique to each one of the cultures and things that they overlap or things that are the same about both. Let's go ahead and jump into our reading. Many cultures in one. Do you sing songs, dance, make art, tell stories, or play games? These are ways of expressing your culture. Songs, dance, art, stories, and even games are shared among families and friends. They are passed down over time from one person to the next. Over time, they become part of a culture. Today, the United States has the third largest population in the world. It's made up of many people with various heritages. Heritage means a background or tradition. Some people in the United States are descended from people in Europe, Africa, Asia, and other parts of the Americas. Some have Native American heritage. Many are from more than one ethnic group. People brought many different religions, languages, stories, dances, songs, and customs to the nation. Because of this, people express their culture in our communities in many ways. Art. Art is one way people express culture. People create art to show their designs, feelings, and values. Visual art includes paintings, drawings, and sculptures. In museums in the United States today, you can see different types of works by artists. Some come from hundreds of years ago. Some were made today. Museums show art from many different cultures. These include oil paintings that show the influence of European heritage. They include ink drawings that reflect East Asian cultures. Some art looks like things you would see in real life. Other art may not look like anything you would see in real life. Sometimes artists do not mean for their work to be in museums. Norman Rockwell drew illustrations for newspapers and advertisements. Now his art is shown in museums all over the world. Andy Warhol made art for museums that sometimes looked like it was made for advertisements. Art exists outside of museums as well. Today, Native American people still make beadwork and pottery as they have for hundreds of years. African Americans use traditional weaving patterns from Africa in blankets and in clothing. People paint murals in cities all over the country that show the influence of different cultures. Art is everywhere in our communities. So one of the things that we can list in our graphic organizer here is that both cultures create art. We know that the Native Americans created beadwork and pottery, and that the African American side used traditional weaving art when they were making their art. Storytelling. Poems, songs, and stories are written art. Originally, people talked and sang to each other. Eventually, people began to write these stories in songs. Folk tales have been handed down over time. Many began as tales of true events and real people. Over time, stories changed. American pioneers told folk tales that showed their adventurous spirit. Pioneers were people who settled in wilderness areas. They told folk tales about the lumberjack Paul Bunyan and the railroad worker John Henry. Many believe these stories are exaggerations of real-life events. Stories are often sacred to cultures. Native Americans tell stories about clever animals solving problems. So do African Americans. Enslaved people in Africa passed down stories that came from their African ancestors. Some of these stories are about a clever spider escaping danger. Some stories are still very important to culture today. So another thing we can put in our Venn diagram over here is that aside from them all making art and all having music and dance be a part of their culture, both also have oral traditions that include songs and storytelling and folk tales. Now we know that African American culture and Native American culture both told stories about clever animals. We just came across that in our reading. So that's another thing you can put in the both section. Music and dance. Music and dance are important ways people show their cultures. They take many forms. In the United States, orchestras play music created by artists from all over the world. Native Americans also use music to express their cultures. They often play flutes and drums. Combining African, Native American, and European musical traditions, African Americans developed musical styles of blues, jazz, rock and roll, and hip hop. Dance in the United States also shows a mix of cultures. Native Americans performed dances like the stomp dance. Ballet came from Europe. Latin American dances like salsa are popular. In the 1980s, a new kind of dance called breakdancing became popular in American cities. The violin is played in classical and jazz music. In folk, country, and bluegrass music, it's often called a fiddle. Breakdancing started in New York. So another thing we can put into our graphic organizer is that Native Americans' music included things like flutes and drums and stomp dancing, and African Americans developed their own musical cultures, such as blues, jazz, rock and roll, and hip hop. Religious tolerance. Religion is a set belief held by a group of people. The United States has no official religion. Rather, its laws protect religious freedom. This means that all people have the right to practice their own beliefs. People are encouraged to practice tolerance. Tolerance means respecting something different from your own beliefs and customs. These are places of worship for the four most practiced religions in the United States: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Buddhism. All right, now that takes us to the end of this lesson. Now you should have completed your Venn diagram comparing the two different cultures of the Native Americans and the African Americans. Then we're going to go on to our next pages, page 102 and 103. Now in the Think About It section, it says, how do different groups express their cultures? So here you can put a variety of information, but make sure you point out that a lot of people or a lot of different cultures express themselves through art, folk tales, different kinds of oral traditions, the religions they follow, music. Any of the examples that we went over, you can discuss here. In the bottom section, it says local news report. Imagine traveling through your community and observing two ways in which different groups express their cultures. Write a short local news report in which you describe what you see, hear, and experience. Be sure to describe the location in your community, the culture group, and the events. So explain specific examples of cultural expression that you see in your community in a creative way. Identify and describe the location and the cultural group within that community, and give details about what you're seeing, if it's artwork, if it's music, if it's dance, theater, if it's a particular kind of architecture or building that comes from a particular country. You can list that as well. Then in your Connect to the Essential question, where it says pull it together, how do the expressions of culture in your community make your community unique? So here in this section, you're going to write about how different communities express their culture and how they make the community a more wholesome and unique location to be. Make sure you use complete sentences and lots of detail. And if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have an amazing day. Take care. Bye-bye.